Claire and I first met Carly Shuler at the inaugural Sandbox Summit at CES in Vegas, when her groundbreaking study for the Joan Ganz Cooney Center at Sesame Workshop, D is for Digital, was presented. Today, she's joined by Carla Englebrecht Fisher to explain the role research plays in developing a good toy. Welcome, Carly and Carla.
Thanks, Wendy. Thanks, Claire, for having us. Before Carla and I get into our 10 tips for developing quality toys, I just want to tell you a little bit about where we're coming from. So in 1966, Joan Ganz Cooney authored a study entitled The Potential Uses of Television in Preschool Education. Now, this is a real paper. You can find it and download it on our website. And it was basically written to answer the fundamental question, how can emerging media be used to help children learn? Well, at the time, emerging media referred to open circuit television, and the answer was a show called Sesame Street. Now, 40 years after that landmark paper stimulated the launch of the show, Sesame Workshop has established a new organization dedicated to advancing children's learning in a rapidly changing world. The Joan Ganz Cooney Center at Sesame Workshop is an independent, nonprofit organization dedicated to catalyzing and supporting research, innovation, and investment in digital media technologies to advance children's learning. So before we dive in, I just want to direct you to this quote from Mrs. Cooney. "We don't pretend that media or a television show can solve the problems of our world, but we do believe it would be a terrible mistake not to use these most influential tools to contribute to the solutions." I wanted to read that because I find it inspiring, and I think it speaks a little bit to the responsibility that we all have as people in kids' media and kids' toys to make products that encourage children's healthy development and learning. So Carla and I are going to give you 10 suggestions that hopefully will help you do that in a really tangible way. And as we go through them, you'll see there's probably some overlap with things that have come up in the previous panels and the previous presentations, which have been fantastic, and that just speaks to how important these things are. Our first tip, bridge the gap between industry and academia. There is a wealth of child development knowledge and psychology and cognitive development knowledge housed within the four walls of academic institutions, nationwide, worldwide, and unfortunately, very rarely does that knowledge, or sometimes rarely, does that knowledge actually end up in the products that are on the shelves of your local Walmart, that are in the hands of kids, that are on the screens of kids. And if we can bridge that gap, the more we'll make quality products, quality educational products, creative products. So how can you really do that? The first way, convene multidisciplinary teams. So if you can bring together, and I'll speak a little bit to the Sesame Workshop model here, every Sesame Street episode brings together producers, educational researchers, and content specialists to develop something that both is fun and works. And I've had the opportunity, in my past before coming to the Cooney Center and Sesame to work on a team and that was multidisciplinary, and there's that tension, the educators pushing their objectives and the producers frowning and vice versa. But when that tension turns into collaboration and you come up with a product that everyone's happy with, that's magic. And someone in the last panel spoke about, there's all this great academic knowledge, but we also have to make products that sell and that can be commercialized, and I completely agree with that. But there are examples of some of the best products that have followed this model. I mentioned Sesame Street as one of them. This guy up here, you heard Mitchell Resnick and Michael McNally on a panel this morning, Lego Mindstorms, developed out of MIT Media Lab. Fantastic product, multidisciplinary teams. So we are practical. We know not everybody has the capability to convene these teams throughout the whole development process, but there are a lot of other ways that you can apply this kind of knowledge in child development learning and product design in your PD.
So our second recommendation is just to incorporate research and testing. And we really consider that research and testing are a cornerstone of both the development and the discovery process. And what you see up here is a partial list of the many methods that are available to developers. They're roughly in order from least expensive to really expensive, but cost is always going to come down to what you put into it. So a survey may cost you very little to do, it may cost you a lot to do. But our point is that everyone can afford some kind of testing, and that these methods should be integrated throughout your timeline. In the next few slides, I'm going to talk through just a couple of these methods that I think have not received enough attention so far and that I think might be helpful to you. I'll tell you, I love this slide. And it's because of the crazy image, which stick with me for a second, and I'll walk you through it. But this next recommendation is to track what users do. And that in the QA testing of large-scale video games, there's a lot of lessons that we can learn. Data tracking is incredibly useful for the design and development of games, that it can be used to identify where users get stuck. It can help you aggregate reaction times. It can help you identify usability information. And this picture up here is a really great example of that. This is actually from the game Halo 3, which probably is one of the last games you'd ever expect anybody standing up here to talk about today. But Bungie publishes heat maps of all of their worlds on their website. And what this shows you is the colors. It's a top-down view of, I believe it's the Avalanche world. I'm not a Halo player, so I'm sorry if anybody is. The colors represent the areas where people are most likely to die by assault weapons. And so the red area where people really frequently die, what it is the big black blob is an edge where people sit, and then people sit up there and basically snipe at people. So totally out there, has nothing to do with what we're talking about necessarily until you think about it in a different context. Say this was a top-down view of your virtual world, and what the colors represent are actually how long users are spending their time in different areas. So suddenly the red area is a place where kids are spending a lot of time. Well, what does that tell you? It tells you potentially that there's a usability problem and people are getting stuck. Or it tells you that there's something really, really cool happening and people are hanging out there and enjoying it, and that maybe you should try to replicate it. You're only going to be able to get at those questions by using other methods to triangulate what's going on, but it can really help inform how to spend your research dollars. So I realize this one's kind of a little more specific to game developers or software developers, but you can also, even if you're collecting data in a number of different forms, you can think about interesting ways to visualize the information so that you're telling a really tangible and good story. So our next recommendation is just to read. And you've all received a copy in the red bags of a handout that Carly and I put together. And this handout lists a number of resources that we think are valuable for developers. And we hope there's some that are familiar to you and some that are new to you. And there's a mix of basic developmental psychology resources, and then there's a mix of more academic resources. And the reason I call out these two categories is because there's really two stages to this recommendation of reading. One is to just become familiar with the basics of developmental psychology, understanding the age group that you're developing for. And the second stage is really diving into the academic research, which is where things can get really overwhelming really quickly because there's all these crazy tables going on and stuff. And that's where, incidentally, bridging this gap into the academic world can be really, really helpful because you have people at your fingertips to help explain what's going on. Or you can even form a reading group, or there's a number of different ways that you can approach it. But by knowing what research is out there, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can use the research that's relevant to what you're doing, stand on the shoulders, and run with it and start off that much farther ahead of the game. And when you're looking at research, it's really important to look at unusual places. There's some fantastic research happening in Europe and just overseas research institutions that I think we tend to forget about. We're insular. We know there's fantastic stuff happening all over the States, but there's fantastic stuff happening all over the world. And you can also look in unusual fields, that there's great stuff in anthropology. There's great stuff happening in computer science. There's even accessibility studies for people who have physical or cognitive difficulties. There can be some really relevant and tangible ideas that apply to children. And this is an endeavor that can become expensive very quickly as well, so I just want to put in a plug for your local library. They can often really actually help you get access to a lot of these research reports pretty quickly and easily. So, yay libraries. My fifth recommendation is to become an observer, and this has sort of been echoed already a little bit today, that I hope we all play with kids as many opportunities as we have and we watch them. But I know it's really hard sometimes to find the age group that you want to work with, or you feel a little uncomfortable hanging around the playground for a little too long. You don't want to be that creepy person. But the fantastic thing, another really great thing about YouTube and video sharing sites is that you have tons and tons of observations of kids at your fingertips. That, even in this picture on screen, which is incidentally my friend's daughter, all very cute, right? You can look behind her and see what kind of toys she has. You can watch videos of these kids, and you can just look at how they're interacting with products. There's videos of 2-year-olds using the iPhone, and what fantastic opportunity to just look and see what they're doing. I know it's not the most scientific way of looking at things, but it gives you an idea of where to head, where to start, what to think about. Another way that you can get at this kind of information too is just walking the toy store aisles. You get to see kids in a very enjoyable environment, and you can also look at just the shelf real estate that products are given, and you get an idea of, like, if there's a lot of them on the shelf, it's probably a pretty popular product, unless Carly pointed out if it's on sale, you might want to think twice about it. You're up, madame.
So Carla just talked a little bit about the research, and now I'm going to talk a little bit about the development. One suggestion that we feel pretty strongly about is to break the traditional model of one child per screen. So when I first scanned the market to see what was out there when I was writing Ideas for Digital, I guess about 1.5 years ago, the bulk of products on the market really followed a stereotypical model of one child sitting alone in front of one screen, playing with a controller. Maybe there were 2 kids, but they were really more interacting with the controller and the screen than each other. Then this product named the Wii came along, and I'm happy to say kind of blew that model out of the water and proved that kids and parents and families and me are really looking for products that encourage this kind of interaction. Just because it's technology, it doesn't mean that you can't interact with something else. So how can we really do this? The first tip is to encourage intergenerational interaction. We know that the best learning takes place when an adult is present to scaffold a child's learning. We know that kids should be playing with their parents, and the more they do, the better the healthier they're going to develop. So as you're developing your products, think about that. Think about how you can actively encourage that interaction. And again, if you look at the picture, you think about the Wii, not only is this great to bring families together, and I've analogized it to the board game of the 21st century, but obviously the market wants it. Still a hugely successful product, almost 2 years after its launch. The second point is think outside the keyboard box. So there are a multitude of things that you can plug in, or if we're thinking wirelessly, not plug in to a screen. It doesn't just have to be a little controller, and it doesn't just have to be, a keyboard with letters and numbers on it. And in fact, speaking again about the Wii, if you look at the top 5 games, the top 5 Wii games in sales last month, less than half of them were focused around the traditional Wii controller. So you're plugging things in like a steering wheel, like a balance board, like a guitar. So think about how these can be used in both educational and just creative applications. And then finally, combine the virtual and physical worlds. Webkinz has been mentioned a few times, and a lot of people have talked about why that product was such a success. And it took a really age-old play pattern, a physical plush, there was nothing digital about it, and kind of brought it into the 21st century. And so how can we use this for kids' learning? Well, in the Harris poll, just to give one example, they found that kids like to bring toys in the car. Well, no big surprise. And I would ask you, what did you picture when you thought about kids playing with an electronic toy in the car? I pictured a kid alone in the back seat, maybe with their headphones on, probably not interacting. But that doesn't have to be the case. There could be a product that encourages kids to be talking to their parents, to be looking out the window, to be documenting their experiences. So bridging this gap between the virtual and the physical is going to become more and more important, and technology only enables us to do that. The next tip is to leverage consumer market trends for learning. There are a lot of these trends and these buzzwords that we hear about, and a lot of them actually can be used to help kids learn. And I'd like you just to look at this image for a minute. This is a collaboration of pictures that kids themselves created on kerpoof.com, the online browser-based creation tool. And, there's certainly people in the room who have more of a child development background than me, but if you look at it, there's something going on here. They're well thought out, they're creative, they are intense. So user-generated content, which I've dubbed youth-generated content, has amazing potential for learning. This has been talked about a lot already today, but I can't say how important it is. Things like Scratch, creating games, creating movies, creating pictures, amazing opportunities. Virtual worlds, there has been a promulgation of virtual worlds for kids. There's going to be a lot more. I think everyone's talking about how many are launching. And what's going to happen is, I think and I hope that the ones that really encourage kind of the out-of-the-box, user-controlled experience will fall ahead of the ones that don't. So keep that in mind. Video content on the web. In 2007, I was surprised to learn that video streaming actually was as popular as all other online activities, including things like email and chat. So what does that mean for kids, and what does that mean for learning? What an amazing opportunity to reuse and repurpose all of the amazing assets that have been developed over the past 50 or so years for TV. You don't always have to spend all the money and start from the beginning. And a little bit later on, Makita's going to talk about Sesame Street's new website. And finally, casual games. This is a huge topic, but there's a great paper on the Joan Ganz Cooney website that was recently authored by gaming guru James Paul G that talks about how games can be used to address the fourth grade slump. So there's a lot of potential here. And the next suggestion is to go beyond the 3 R's. Not to say that reading, writing, and arithmetic aren't important. Quite on the contrary, with a third of our kids not reading at grade level by the 4th grade, if you can make products that encourage these traditional literacies, that's amazing. But there are more things that toy and play can do and that they have always naturally done. And if you, again, think about them as you're designing your toy, then it'll just create better experiences. And if you look at the Partnership for 21st Century Skills framework, things like creativity and innovation, critical thinking and problem solving, communication and collaboration, global knowledge and skills, well, if you think about the way we played 50 years ago and you think about the way we play today, those are all really natural things that can be facilitated through the toys that our kids play with, but it has to be well thought out to really do that. And I just like to highlight this one product from last year. It was a successful product called the Jax iClock, and it was essentially a microscope that the kid could look at. So in this case, they're looking at a butterfly wing, and it would be projected on the screen. So you can see a video of this on YouTube. And I don't know whether this toy was built with explicit educational goals or not, but there are a lot of opportunities here for learning.
So same as when you're just starting to explore other types of content, don't forget about mechanics. And before I go into the actual specifics of this, I just want to clarify what I mean by game mechanics, because everybody seems to have their own little definition of what they think of it. To me, game mechanics are the set of rules that we impose in a game in order to make it fun, or to make it the way that you play the game. So for example, if I'm playing checkers, some of the mechanics might be that I move forward only on the black squares and diagonally, and if I meet a player of another color, I jump over that player and I can take it. So those are just some of the basic rules that we're giving to a game. So with all of the new hardware that are coming out, there's fantastic opportunities for new types of interaction. And where there's new types of interaction and new types of hardware, means there's really great opportunity to explore new mechanics. And whether it's negative space, or it's rhythm games, or it's touch interfaces, or I'm sure like all of you could think of 100 different mechanics that I can't even think of that are just waiting to be tested out and tried. It's not just about matching and coloring and memory games anymore, although the new platforms also mean that we can add new twists to those old faithful mechanics that we know work well with the different age groups that we're developing for. And the other thing is to look to general audience games, so not necessarily the most popular games or the ones that gets the most publicity or the ones that have the highest production values, but just kind of check out what else is happening there, because there's some really cool mechanics going on that could really be a source of inspiration. For example, this picture here is from Lost Winds on WiiWare. How many people are familiar with this game? Okay, still a few. I think it's beautiful. It's not the longest game or the most super exciting game, but it's got really cool mechanics where you're actually playing as the wind. It's just something different that is fun to try and give it leads to a number of other ideas. And so finally, you can guess that since our presentation was titled 10 Tips, we're at the last tip. And this is really to tap into your own childhood. Today we've given you a number of ideas that we hope will spark some thought for you.